open with a prayer.
Lass uns mit einem Gebet ab. Lieber Vater im Himmel, ich danke dir für diese Morgenandacht. Und danke, dass wir die Möglichkeit haben, deine Bibel jetzt zu studieren. Und ich möchte bitten, dass du unter uns kommst und uns lehrst durch den Heiligen Geist. Und dass du mit Bruder Mark bist, wenn er versucht, seine Gedanken auszulegen. Und hilf uns, jedem Punkt folgen zu können. Und dass wir die Antwort erhalten auf unsere Fragen, die wir haben mögen. Und ich möchte auch bitten, dass du die Übersetzung und die Technik und die Leute segnest, die über den Livestream zuschauen. Und möge diese Morgenandacht uns stärken für den Tag. In Jesu Namen. Amen.
Okay, so yesterday morning we were looking at the mercy of God.
Gestern Morgen haben wir uns die Gnade Gottes angeschaut.
And we were understanding this through these this time period, this little time of peace between these two Sunday laws.
Und wir haben diese Zeitspanne, diese kleine Zeit des Friedens zwischen diesen beiden Sonntagsgesetzen angeschaut.
Okay, and we looked at this through Genesis 41 and Daniel's 1 to 4.
Und wir haben uns das angeschaut durch 1. Mose 41 und die Kapitel von Daniel 1 bis 4.
Okay, so here we have the line for the movement, and when he gets to the end here, he now has a people that are filled with the Spirit to go forward and warn about the coming Sunday law.
Und hier haben wir die Linie der Bewegung, und wenn man zu diesem Punkt am Ende kommt, dann hat er jetzt ein Volk, das gefüllt ist mit dem Heiligen Geist, und sie gehen jetzt vorwärts, um die Welt vor dem kommenden Sonntagsgesetz zu warnen.
Okay, so he has a people that are clothed in his righteousness.
Er hat jetzt ein Volk, was gekleidet ist mit seiner Gerechtigkeit.
And the external illustrates the internal, right?
Das Externe stellt das Interne dar.
So at the same time you have this two-horned power rising there that's like a lamb.
Und zur selben Zeit hat man hier die zweihörnige Macht, die aufsteht, und sie ist wie ein Lamm.
It's also dressed in a righteous garment,
Sie
right?
ist auch in einem gerechten Gewand gekleidet.
And we have this time of peace,
Und
right?
dann haben wir diese Zeit des Friedens,
Which is a separation of church and state.
was eine Trennung von Kirche und Staat ist.
Okay, and however, this nation that rises up there, the woman deceives him and is now sitting on his mind, and he speaks like a dragon.
Aber diese Nation, die hier wie ein Lamm aufkommt, sie wird, da verführt ihn jetzt die Frau, und dann spricht er wie ein Drache.
But Nebuchadnezzar this happens to him in ignorance, right?
Aber dem Nebukadnezar geschieht das in Unwissenheit.
Okay, I just want to post a quote.
Ich möchte ein Zitat schicken.
One second. Post that yesterday. One sec. Okay, yes, there we go. It's in Great corner, I see. 581. Okay, sorry about that. Go to the live stream and I'll post a quote there.
Geht zum Livestream, da habe ich ein Zitat gepostet.
It says, God's word has given warning of the impending danger. Let this be unheeded, and the Protestant world will learn what the purposes of Rome really are. Only when it is too late to escape the snare. What is the snare?
Was ist die Schlinge? Oder die Falle?
No, the snare is the Sunday law.
Also diese Falle ist das Sonntagsgesetz.
When you read about Belshazzar, right, we read it yesterday. You just go back to the quote from yesterday about Belshazzar.
Also geht nochmal zurück zu dem Zitat über Belshazzar von gestern.
I did post it, yes. It's Testimonies to Ministers, 437.
Dann gehen wir nochmal zu dem Zitat von gestern von TM 437.
It says, Belshazzar, awed by this representation of God's power, showing that they had a witness, though they knew it not, had had great opportunities of knowing the works of the living God and his power and of doing his will. He had been privileged with much light. His grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, had been warned of his danger in forgetting God and glorifying himself. Belshazzar had a knowledge of his banishment from the society of men and his association with the beasts of the field, and these facts, which ought to have been a lesson to him, he disregarded as if they had never occurred, and he went on repeating the sins of his grandfather. He dared to commit the crimes which brought God's judgments upon Nebuchadnezzar. He was condemned, not alone that he himself was doing wickedly, but that he had not availed himself of opportunities and capabilities, if cultivated, of being right. God will not condemn any at the judgment because they honestly believed a lie or conscientiously cherished error, but it will be because they neglected the opportunities of making themselves acquainted with truth. The infidel will be condemned not because he is an infidel, but because he did not take advantage of the means that God placed within his reach to enable him to become a Christian. Okay, that's not the quote, but there's a quote that talks about Belshazzar taken in the snare.
Also das war jetzt nicht das Zitat, was ich meinte. Es gibt ein Zitat über Belshazzar, der in die Falle gelangt ist.
Doesn't matter. Okay. Doesn't matter. Don't need to make such a big point about this at the moment. But in if you just go to Ezekiel chapter 8.
Aber gehen wir jetzt zu Ezekiel 8.
The point is that as soon as Belshazzar had set up this Sunday law, his probation closed. Right?
Der Punkt ist, sobald Belshazzar das Sonntagsgesetz aufgerichtet hat, dann hat sich seine Gnadentür geschlossen.
Go to verse 16.
Ezekiel 8, Vers 16.
Okay, it says, And he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs towards the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east. And they worshipped the sun toward the east. Then he said unto me, Hast thou seen this, O son of man? Is it a light thing to the house of Judah that they commit the abominations which they commit here? For they have filled the land with violence, and have returned to provoke me to anger. And lo, they put the branch to their nose. Therefore will I also deal in fury. Mine eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity. And though they cry in mine ears with a loud voice, yet will I not hear them. Right? So, when does your probation close?
Also wann schließt sich deine Gnadentür?
Okay, all those people out there, they're all probations closed. Okay, after you knew, right?
Also nachdem du es gewusst hast und die Sonne angebetet
Okay,
hast.
so the difference between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar was Nebuchadnezzar was in ignorance, right? Even though it was this terrible crime against God, right?
Und der Unterschied zwischen Belshazzar und Nebukadnezar war eben, dass Nebukadnezar in Unwissenheit war, auch wenn es ein schreckliches Vergehen gegen Gott war.
Okay, and on top of that, the Lord used. We read about Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is, and we've read this quote before, that the Lord deemed Nebuchadnezzar. He had an innate sense of righteousness, right?
Und darüber hinaus kennen wir auch dieses Zitat über Nebukadnezar, dass er eben einen angeborenen Sinn für Gerechtigkeit hat.
Okay, so he used him to punish the people from his people who had turned from him in this time period here.
Also Gott hat ihn benutzt, um das Volk zu bestrafen.
That had turned from him in this time period here.
Also sein Volk zu bestrafen, was in dieser Zeitspanne sich von ihm abgewendet hat.
Okay, so although Nebuchadnezzar was doing wickedness, he was in ignorance, and the Lord looked at him as, in some sense, more righteous than his own people.
Also obwohl Nebukadnezar hier diese große Bosheit begangen hat, war er eben in Unwissenheit und er war mehr gerecht als Gottes Volk in dieser Zeitspanne.
Okay, but at the same time, in Daniel chapter 1, he takes the righteous people of his nation into captivity to do what?
Aber zur selben Zeit in Daniel Kapitel 1, da nimmt er die gerechten Leute von Gottes Volk in die Gefangenschaft, um was zu tun?
Yeah, to be a light to Nebuchadnezzar, right?
Dass sie für Nebukadnezar ein Licht sind.
So Nebuchadnezzar has been used to purge out all the rebels so he has a pure church.
Nebukadnezar wird benutzt, um all diese Rebellen herauszureinigen, damit er eine reine Gemeinde hat.
But at the same time, the faithful ones are being used as a light to those in Babylon that would see that light and come to the truth, right?
Aber zur selben Zeit wurden die Gerechten benutzt als Licht für diejenigen in Babylon, dass sie dann zu ihnen zur Wahrheit kommen können.
Yeah, right?
Richtig.
Okay. So, and we see that. So when we get to the end here, Nebuchadnezzar is now a changed man at the end, right?
Wir können das sehen und wenn man dann hier zum Ende kommt, ist Nebukadnezar jetzt ein veränderter Mensch.
Okay, so if we go to Daniel 3
Gehen wir jetzt zu Daniel 3
and verse 30.
und Vers 30.
So this is the 3 Hebrews that were in the fiery furnace,
Das
right?
sind jetzt die 3 Hebräer, die im Feuerofen waren.
And at the end it says, Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego in the province of Babylon. What does he do?
Was tut er?
He promotes them, he lifts them up, right?
Er erhöht sie. Also, ist das ein Promote?
Yeah, he lifts them up.
Er befördert sie, also er erhöht sie.
Okay, so Christ says at the cross, If I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me,
Und
right?
Christus sagt am Kreuz, wenn ich erhöht werde, dann werde ich alle Menschen zu mir ziehen.
Right?
Richtig.
Okay, so go to Daniel 2,
Geht zu Daniel 2,
verse 48.
Vers 48.
It says, Then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Different story, same illustration,
Das
right?
ist eine andere Geschichte, aber dieselbe Darstellung.
So Daniel 2, Daniel 3, and also if we go to Genesis 41,
Also Daniel 2 und Daniel 3 haben wir gesehen und gehen wir jetzt auch zu 1. Mose 41
And we go to verse 43.
und geht zu Vers 43.
It says, and he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. Right? So we see that Daniel is made ruler over all the land of Babylon. Joseph made ruler over all the land of Egypt. Right? Same illustration. Right?
Wir können also sehen, Daniel wird Herrscher über das ganze Land Babylon gemacht und Josef über das ganze Land Ägypten. Es ist also dieselbe Darstellung.
So you have three witnesses right here that Nebuchadnezzar is changed. Right?
Man hat 3 Zeugen hier, die zeigen, dass Nebukadnezar hier verändert
Right?
ist.
He's completely changed his mind from when he started at the beginning. Right?
Sein Verstand hat sich vollkommen geändert im Vergleich zu wie er am Anfang angefangen hat.
Okay, but he still doesn't know God.
Aber er
Right?
kennt immer noch Gott nicht.
Okay, so when you go to Daniel chapter 4,
Und wenn
Right.
wir jetzt zu Daniel 4 gehen,
at the end here, it marks him being cut down. Right?
dann markiert es ja hier am Ende, dass er abgeschnitten wird.
Okay, and for how long?
Und wie lange?
For these 7 good years, right?
Diese 7 guten Jahre.
Okay, so for 7 good years, it doesn't mean that he's not in power anymore. It means that he is receiving of the corn of heaven, the manna that comes down, right?
Das bedeutet jetzt nicht, dass er für diese 7 guten Jahre nicht mehr an der Macht ist, sondern er bekommt jetzt hier einfach das Korn vom Himmel, also das Manna.
Okay, I want to show you this, right?
Und ich möchte euch das zeigen.
So, go to Daniel chapter 6,
Geht zu Daniel 6.
because Sister White paralleled Daniel 4 with Daniel 2, right?
In Weitfeld hat er Daniel 4 mit Daniel 2 verglichen.
Okay, and the Bible cannot contradict itself.
Und die Bibel kann sich selbst nicht
So,
widersprechen.
how we're to understand these things is by bringing them all together and then forming our theories, right?
Wie wir diese Dinge verstehen, ist eben, indem wir alles zusammenbringen und dann unsere Theorie formulieren.
Okay, so Daniel chapter 6 and
Daniel
verse
6
1.
und Vers 1.
It says, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. What do we see?
Was können wir sehen?
The same thing as what we just read in Daniel 2, Daniel 3, and Genesis 41, right?
Dasselbe, was wir gerade gelesen haben in Daniel 2, in Daniel 3 und 1. Mose 41.
Okay, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Right? So what was in him?
Was war in ihm?
An excellent spirit, right?
Ein vortrefflicher Geist.
Okay, so if I be lifted up, I will draw men unto me. What draws all the people unto you?
Also wenn ich erhöht werde, werde ich alle Menschen zu mir ziehen. Und was zieht dann alle Menschen zu dir?
Yeah, the Holy Spirit, right?
Also Christus in dir, der Heilige Geist.
Keep your place in Daniel 6. Go to Genesis 41 again.
Und haltet euren Finger hier in Daniel 6. Gehen wir nochmal zu 1. Mose 41.
And go to verse 38.
Und geht zu Vers 38.
So this is after Joseph has given Pharaoh the understanding of his dream, right?
Und das ist jetzt nachdem Josef dem Pharao das Verständnis über seinen Traum gegeben hat.
It says, and Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such an one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? What do we see?
Das können wir sehen.
Same illustration, right?
Selbe Darstellung.
He's lifted up and set over the whole realm of Egypt because the Spirit of God is in him. Right?
Wird erhöht und über das ganze Reich Ägyptens gesetzt, weil eben dieser Geist Gottes in ihm ist.
Right? Okay. And is Joseph a type of Christ?
Und ist Josef ein Typus für Christus?
Yes. Now, okay, so would that be in agreement with this waymark?
Wäre das in Übereinstimmung mit dieser Wegmarke?
Okay, why?
Ja, und warum?
Okay, it's the baptism of Christ,
Das
right?
ist die Taufe Christi.
It's the end of the test for the church, and God now has a people that are sealed and fully representing Christ, right?
Das ist jetzt das Ende für den Test der Gemeinde und Gott hat jetzt ein Volk, was versiegelt ist und vollständig Christus darstellen.
Right? They have had it's their second birth.
Sie hatten eben ihre zweite Geburt.
So they are perfectly representing Christ, filled with the Holy Spirit, just like he was at his baptism,
Sie
right?
stellen dann vollkommen Christus dar, sie sind gefüllt mit dem Heiligen Geist und stellen ihn vollkommen dar, so wie er an seiner Taufe war.
Right? No evil propensities.
Keine bösen Neigungen.
Christ had no evil propensities at his baptism.
Und Christus hatte keine bösen Neigungen an seiner Taufe.
So, perfect fulfillment,
Das
right?
ist die vollkommene Erfüllung.
And they're now going to be sowing the seed here in this time period, right?
Sie werden jetzt in dieser Zeitspanne den Samen sehen.
Right?
Richtig.
So you have Daniel 6, you have Daniel 2, Daniel 3, and Genesis 41, all marking the king at the end here lifting up God's people, right?
Man hat in Daniel 6, in Daniel 2 und 3 und 1. Mose 41 markieren alle, dass der König hier Gottes Volk erhöht.
And you have one witness that says he's humbled in the dust for these 7 years,
Und
right?
man hat einen Zeugen, der zeigt, dass er in den Staub gedemütigt ist für diese 7 Jahre.
But in agreement with that one witness, Genesis 41 shows that it's a time where they're gathering all the corn from heaven, right?
In Übereinstimmung damit hat man dann auch 1. Mose 41, wo es zeigt, diese Zeitspanne, wo sie das ganze Korn des Himmels sammeln.
Okay, so the king gets humbled at the end and he's now able to receive this corn from heaven. He's allowing this work to go forward,
Also der
right?
König wird hier am Ende gedemütigt in den Staub und dann kann er dieses Korn des Himmels während dieser Zeitspanne erhalten. Er ist jetzt offen dafür.
Right? Okay. So what we want to deal with today is the second Sunday law,
Und was
right?
wir heute anschauen wollen, ist das zweite Sonntagsgesetz.
Because, for instance, Matthew 24, which Sunday law is it dealing with?
Weil zum Beispiel Matthäus 24, mit welchem Sonntagsgesetz handelt das?
The second, right?
Das zweite.
Because it takes you right down to the end of the 7 plagues,
Weil
right?
das führt dich dann bis hinunter zu den 7 Plagen.
In Matthew 24, Christ is standing here on the Mount of Olives, right?
Und in Matthäus 24 steht Christus hier auf dem Ölberg.
So who does he represent there?
Wen stellt er dort dar?
Yeah, Daniel and Joseph and all those that were just lifted up, right?
Daniel und Josef und all diejenigen, also sie sind gerade erhöht worden.
He says, your house is left unto you desolate, and he goes over to the Mount of Olives and he now tells them what is about to come,
Er
right?
sagt, euer Haus ist euch wüst hinterlassen und er geht auf den Ölberg und er sagt ihnen jetzt, was dabei ist, also was kurz davor ist zu kommen.
John also, right? In
Johannes auch.
the book of Revelation, John is humbled in the dust,
Im
right?
Buch Offenbarung wird Johannes in den Staub gelegt.
Right? His sins are blotted out.
Seine Sünden werden ausgetilgt.
And he's now given the revelation, right?
Und ihm wird jetzt die Offenbarung gegeben.
And in Revelation chapter 10, right, he's told to eat that book,
Und in
right?
Offenbarung 10 wird ihm gesagt, er sollte dieses Buch essen.
And we looked at this, and the book is when the law is being written on your heart, right,
Yeah.
which is the seal of God.
Wir haben uns das ja angeschaut, dass das dann darstellt, wenn das Gesetz auf dein Herz geschrieben ist. Das ist das Siegel Gottes.
So John is doing the exact same work, right? And he's about to tell them what's about to come, right? If you just go to Revelation 1.
Also geht zur Offenbarung 1. Johannes macht eben dasselbe Werk, er sagt ihm, was dabei ist zu geschehen.
Verse 1.
Morgen 1, Vers 1.
It says, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. Right? So, John is humbled in the dust here, and he has to tell the 7 churches, and then he's telling them all these things that are coming in their order. Exactly the same as Daniel, etc., etc. Right?
Also Johannes, er wird hier in den Staub gedemütigt und dann soll er den 7 Gemeinden es sagen und dann sagt er ihnen noch alles weitere in ihrer Reihenfolge, was geschehen soll.
Right? Revelation 17, he's taken to the past, the present, and pointed forward to the future.
Und auf Morgen 17, da zeigt er ihnen die Vergangenheit, die Gegenwart und auch die Zukunft.
So it's all about God having a people, and once he has a people, how they're going to point forward and warn them about this Sunday law that's going to come, right?
Es geht immer darum, dass Gott ein Volk hat und wenn er dieses Volk hat, dann können sie vorwärts gehen und die Leute warnen und sagen über das nächste Sonntagsgesetz, was kommen soll.
Because we see that if you're like Belshazzar and you don't heed that warning, as soon as you bow down and worship that sun, your probation closes,
Ja,
right?
man kann sehen, im Beispiel von Belshazzar, sobald du das weißt dann, und das Sonntagsgesetz machst, dann wird die Gnadenzeit sich schließen.
Right? There's no more sacrifice for sin.
Da gibt es kein Opfer mehr für die
Okay.
Sünde.
So you're not ignorant anymore when you bow down and worship the sun,
Du
right?
bist dann nicht mehr unwissend, wenn du dich niederbeugst und die Sonne anbetest.
Okay. Also, just before we go back to Daniel 6, go to the story of Esther.
Und bevor wir zu Daniel 6 kommen, geht zur Geschichte von Esther.
I just want to look at some thoughts to do with this.
Ich möchte ein paar Gedanken anschauen, die damit zu tun haben.
Because in chapter 1, it's dealing with Vashti,
Und
right?
in Kapitel 1, da handelt es um Vashti.
Who is Vashti?
Wer ist Vashti?
What does she represent?
Was stellt sie dar?
The Protestants, Margaret?
Church.
Yeah, but that's not which church?
Welche Gemeinde?
Okay, it's dealing with the parable of the 10 virgins, right?
Es geht ja um das Gleichnis der 10 Jungfrauen.
Okay, and what you have is in chapter 1, you have that parable coming to an end, right?
Und was man hat in Kapitel 1, dass das Gleichnis zu dem Ende kommt.
Right, so where would that bring us?
Und wo würde uns das hinbringen?
Come on, guys, we've been through this a lot of time. Why are we sitting here in silence? Esther chapter 1, where does it bring us to?
Und wir haben das ja schon mal angeschaut. Wohin bringt uns Esther 1?
Well, I mean, okay, we say final review here, but it's only a type of the final review. The final review is there, right?
Also wir sagen zu dem finale Untersuchung, aber es ist nur ein Typus für das hier am Ende.
Okay. This is where Vashti gets punished, right?
Hier wird Vashti bestraft.
Okay. So, who is it that punishes Vashti?
Und wer ist es, der Vashti bestraft?
Sorry? No, in this story we're reading from the book of Esther. Who is it that punishes Vashti?
In der Geschichte von Esther, wer bestraft Vashti?
Ahasuerus, right?
Ahasverus.
Okay, and we need to look at these stories very closely, right? So, there's some thoughts that, because Ahasuerus in here is an earthly king, right?
Wir müssen das sehr genau anschauen, weil Ahasverus in dieser Geschichte ist ein irdischer König.
What is he doing in chapter 1?
Was macht er in Kapitel 1?
Yeah, he's having a feast, but he's gathering together all the kingdoms of the earth, right?
Also er macht ein Fest.
All the princes and everything of his kingdom, right?
Er macht ein Fest, aber er versammelt auch alle Prinzen von seinem Königreich.
Okay, so there's a thought that this could possibly represent Donald Trump. Right? We just want to play with the thought and see if there's any. It's just a thought. Well, let's look at it.
Also es gibt einen Gedanken dazu, dass das möglicherweise Donald Trump darstellen kann und wir wollen jetzt mit diesem Gedanken spielen und uns das anschauen.
Okay, so here at the end, who is it that punishes the church?
Hier am Ende, wer ist es, der die Gemeinde bestraft?
Okay, yes, it's Rome, Babylon, it's the world that does it, right?
Es ist Rom, Babylon, es ist eben die Welt, die das macht.
Right? Historically, who is it that punishes? It's the state power that punishes the church, right?
Historisch war es ja die Staatsmacht, die die Gemeinde bestraft hat.
Okay, so
If this is not Donald Trump, how would he then
let's not.
give
We're
up
not.
oil
You're,
wine and all these things?
you're not listening to what I'm saying. We're playing with a thought. We're not making it anything. We're just making.
But it breaks principle. I mean.
What principle?
For instance, how can he now give out royal wine and all these things and call the church to come to him? And
Okay, so he's not the. Because
if he's the king of the north, punishing the church at the end,
yes.
he's not giving out royal wine. He's not making a righteous feast. He's not
No.
calling the church to come.
Okay, I get all that. I've got all these questions also. We're just playing with the thought, right? So the point is that he's the one that punishes the. He's the one that punishes Vashti at the end, right?
Also es gibt viele Fragen dazu, aber er ist ja derjenige, der Vashti am Ende bestraft.
Okay, and when you go to chapter 2,
Wenn man zu Kapitel 2 geht,
because at the end of chapter 1, verse 22,
weil am Ende von Kapitel 1 und Vers 22
it says, "For he sent letters to all the king's provinces, and to every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after the language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, that it should be published according to the language of every people." Right? So he makes this decree, right?
macht dieses Dekret.
When you go to Daniel, can't remember which one it is now. Just go to the book of Daniel.
Geht nochmal zum Buch Daniel.
So I'm not. This is just a thought that somebody's given me, and we're just looking at it, right? If it's false, then it's no problem. But
Also das ist nur ein Gedanke, den jemand
go to verse Daniel 3 and verse 29.
Und gehen wir zu Daniel 3, Vers 29.
It says, "Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language." What do we see?
Das können wir sehen.
Yes, we see a worldwide decree, same as what we see here in Esther chapter 1,
Wir
right?
sehen ein weltweites Dekret, dasselbe, was wir auch in Esther 1 sehen.
Okay, but we know at this point that his heart has now changed,
Wir
right?
wissen, dass an diesem Punkt hat sich sein Herz verändert.
Okay, at least as far as Nebuchadnezzar is concerned, right?
Also zumindest was Nebukadnezar angeht.
Okay, go to chapter 2 and verse 1.
Geht zu Kapitel 2, Vers 1 in Esther.
Yes, Esther.
Esther 2, Vers 1.
Okay, it says, "After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that ministered at him, Let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. And let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Haggai the king." So Ahasuerus now sets in place this. He now sets in place this righteous work that is marked at the beginning there, right?
Also Ahasverus, macht jetzt dieses gerechte Werk, was hier am Anfang markiert ist.
Just marking the beginning of the parable of the 10 virgins,
Das
right?
markiert den Anfang des Gleichnisses der 10 Jungfrauen.
Okay, right? So, but let's go to chapter 3 and verse 1.
Geht jetzt zu Kapitel 3 und Vers 1.
It says, after these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set a seat above all the princes that were with him. Right? So, when you go to the book of Daniel, right, in Daniel chapter 6, right,
Also wenn man zum Buch Daniel in Daniel 6 geht,
it changes, it's Darius now that's king, right?
verändert sich das ja, da ist Darius der König.
But it's paralleling the exact same point that where Nebuchadnezzar and Pharaoh lifts up these guys,
Aber
right?
das ist parallel mit demselben Punkt, wo Pharao und Nebukadnezar diese Leute erhöhen.
Right? And then there's this time period where these evil people in his kingdom are trying to find fault with Daniel,
Und da
right?
gibt es aber diese Zeitspanne, wo diese bösen Leute in dem Königreich Fehler am Daniel suchen.
And then what they do is they deceive him, right?
Und was sie tun, ist, dass sie ihn verführen.
Is Darius a righteous king?
Ist Darius ein gerechter König?
Did we get an acknowledgement? Yes or no, right?
Yeah.
Yes, he is, right?
Ja,
So-
ist er.
He then gets deceived into making a decree right here, right?
Und er wird dann hier verführt, indem er ein Dekret macht.
Okay, so so Daniel 6 is a parallel when you get here to Daniel chapter 5,
Also Daniel 6, wenn man hierher kommt, ist eine Parallele zu Daniel 5.
right? So is Belshazzar the ruler of the kingdom?
Ist Belsazar der Herrscher des Königreichs?
No, he's not the ruler. There is a one that's over above him, right?
Nein, er ist nicht der Herrscher, da gibt es einen, der über ihn ist.
Right, he's a co-ruler.
Er ist ein Mitregent.
Okay, and the point I'm making here in the book of Esther, Ahasuerus is the one that sets up Haman, right?
Und der Punkt ist, den ich machen möchte, ist, dass hier im Buch Esther, da ist es ja Ahasverus, der Haman aufrichtet.
Yes, this would be a parallel to Belshazzar, right?
Und Haman, das wäre eine Parallele zu Belsazar.
Okay, because I've always had many questions about the book of Esther in regards. You can see that Ahasuerus does a work of Christ, but there's just some things that it's like doing a work of a king on the earth, right? You can't sort of separate these things,
Also ich
right?
hatte mal so Fragen, weil im Buch Esther, da macht Ahasverus, stellt das Werk Christi dar, aber dann macht er auch Dinge, die ein König auf der Erde tut. Und man kann die Dinge ja nicht wirklich voneinander trennen.
Okay, so that's why I'm looking at these things. So right here, Haman is the one that gets set up. Now, does Haman deceive Ahasuerus?
Und Haman wird hier eben aufgesetzt und verführt Haman Ahasverus.
Yes, he does, right?
Ja, tut er.
Okay, so when you go to Daniel chapter 6, right? Let's go to Daniel chapter 6.
Gehen wir jetzt zu Daniel 6.
So I'm just keeping an open mind. I want to look at these things closely. I don't want to shut my mind and think that something can't be when really we might not understand it properly.
Also ich möchte einen offenen Verstand dafür erhalten und das genau anschauen, weil ich möchte nicht meinen Verstand verschließen, wenn wir Dinge noch nicht so ganz verstehen.
Okay, so yeah, go to verse 4.
Daniel 6, Vers 4.
It says, Then the presidents of princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion or fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. So he's like Job, right?
Der ist so wie hier.
Yes?
Ja.
Because at the beginning of the Sunday law, this is the condition of Job.
Weil am Anfang des Sonntagsgesetzes ist das der Zustand von hier.
Then said these men, We shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. So in the book of Job, Satan is the one standing before God now, accusing Job. He says, yeah, but if you do this, right, if you bring a Sunday law in, he will turn away from you, right?
Im Buch Hiob, da steht ja Satan jetzt vor Gott und verklagt Hiob und er sagt ja, wenn du das tust, also das Sonntagsgesetz bringst, dann wird er sich von dir wenden.
But how does Satan accuse God's people?
Aber wie klagt Satan Gottes Volk an?
He does it through agents.
Er macht das ja durch Werkzeuge. Durch
Okay,
Agenten.
and when you go to that's who these men are here, right? Verse 5.
Und das sind auch diese Männer hier in Vers 5.
Then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the councillors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, where are they prophetically when they do this?
Wo sind sie prophetisch gesehen, wenn sie das tun?
Second Sunday, right?
Im zweiten Sonntagsgesetz.
So, who's here? What are they doing?
Wer ist hier und was tun sie?
It says there's presidents, all the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the councillors and the captains have consulted, right? So there's all these councillors come together, right?
Vers 7. Das sind all diese Ratgeber, die zusammengekommen sind.
Sorry?
Vers 8 im Deutschen.
Okay, in
Das
Vers,
sind immer andere.
im Deutschen ist es Vers 8.
Okay, go back to Daniel 4.
Gehen wir zurück zu Daniel 4.
Verse 31.
Vers 31. Also im Deutschen ist es Vers 28.
It says, while the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven, saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee. Right? Right here. Right?
Also hier.
Okay? This is where it's taken away from him, right? And it says,
Da wird es ihm weggenommen.
okay, but we know that when you bring all the other ones together, it's not literally taken away from him, right? It's marking a point. God's people are now being lifted up and he's receiving of the dew of heaven,
Und
right?
wenn wir all die Dinge zusammenbringen, dann können wir sehen, dass es nicht wirklich von ihm genommen ist, sondern dass Gottes Volk jetzt erhöht ist und er erhält den Tau des Himmels.
He didn't literally lose his kingdom, even historically,
Er
right?
hat sogar historisch nicht buchstäblich sein Königreich verloren.
Okay, verse 32.
Vers 2.
And they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it whomsoever he will. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird claws. And at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honoured him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. So where is he now?
Also Vers 31 im Deutschen. Wo ist er jetzt?
Where is he on the line?
Wo ist er auf der Linie?
Yeah, he's at the end of the 7 years.
Er ist am
Right?
Ende der 7 Jahre.
It says, and all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say unto him, what doest thou? At the same time my reason returned unto me, and for the glory of my kingdom, mine honour and brightness returned unto me, and my counsellors and my lords sought unto me. What do we see?
Was werden wir sehen?
Exactly the same thing in Daniel 6, right? So, gets here, right? As soon as the 7 years are finished, right? Who seeks him?
Also das ist genau dasselbe wie in Daniel 6. Sobald diese 7 Jahre vollendet sind und er hierher kommt, wer sucht ihn dann?
It's counselors, right?
Seine Ratgeber.
And go back to Daniel 6.
Und geht zurück zu Daniel 6.
Let's read it again, verse 6.
Lesen wir nochmal Vers 7 im Deutschen.
Vers 5. Bis Vers 5.
Okay, Vers 5.
Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree. So, Nebuchadnezzar in his whole time period, which would be Darius in this sense, has been receiving the dew from heaven. He's been enlightened about the true God.
Also
Right?
Nebukadnezar in dieser Zeitspanne, und der würde dann auch in diesem Fall Darius darstellen, hat den Tau des Himmels erhalten. Also er wurde erleuchtet über den wahren Gott.
And at the end of the period, he is established as the ruler of this kingdom,
Und
right?
am Ende dieser Zeitspanne wird er etabliert als der Herrscher dieses Königreiches.
Right?
Richtig.
I don't know why people are struggling. It's just simple line upon line, right?
Ich weiß nicht, warum
What's up,
man
Jennifer?
damit zu kämpfen hat. Das ist ja Linie auf Linie.
My struggle right now is how can he then be ignorant when he now makes a Sunday law because he already
No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Okay, when God's people have the first birth, do they fall away?
Also die Frage war, wie kann er dann unwissend sein, wenn er jetzt das zweite Sonntagsgesetz macht und Gottes Volk, nachdem sie die erste Geburt haben, können sie noch wegfallen?
Oh, did they get a chance to return?
Ja, und bekommen sie
Okay.
eine Chance, Buße zu tun?
You maybe not missed the point I made at the beginning. The closing point is the snare. It's the Sunday law. So as long as you don't bow down and worship that sun, you've still got an opportunity to repent, right?
Also diese abschließende Schlinge ist eben das Sonntagsgesetz und solange du noch nicht die Sonne angebetet hast, hast du immer noch eine Zeit zur Buße.
It's showing the external illustrates the internal,
Und das
right?
zeigt, dass das Externe das Interne darstellt.
Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar becomes a righteous man there, right?
Also Nebukadnezar wird hier zu einem gerechten Mann.
And he's now gathering the dew of heaven, just like the virgins gathering the oil,
Und er
right?
sammelt jetzt das Tau des Himmels, so wie die Jungfrauen, die das Öl sammeln.
But what happens to many of those virgins right here?
Was geschieht aber mit vielen von den Jungfrauen hier?
They get deceived,
Sie
Right.
werden verführt
and they become deceivers.
und werden zu Verführern.
But he gets deceived right there, but does he become a deceiver?
Aber er wird hier verführt, aber wird er zum Verführer?
Does he realize what he's done and then humble himself?
Realisiert er, was er getan hat und demütigt sich dann?
Yes, he does, right?
Ja, macht er.
So the point is that there is a ruler over this whole kingdom here who be deceived by someone that's junior to him, right?
Also der Punkt ist, dass hier ein Herrscher ist über das ganze Königreich und er wird verführt zu einem, der unter ihm ist.
Right? You see it? Line upon line, brothers and sisters, right? You got to bring all the evidence together,
Das
right?
ist Linie auf Linie, Geschwister. Man muss alle Beweise zusammenbringen.
So Belshazzar would be someone, the deceiver would be the virgins that fall away and become these deceivers in that sense.
No, Belshazzar's not the virgins. The virgins are internally. He's the king that is the external power, right? That we read it yesterday, we read it again this morning. Why was he guilty here?
Also Belshazzar wäre nicht die Jungfrauen, die dort wegfallen, weil das ist ja eine interne Darstellung. Aber wir haben heute Morgen gelesen, warum
He received great light.
er hat
Right?
ja hier großes Licht erhalten.
But so what did he do right here?
Und was hat er dann aber hier
He went
gemacht?
straight to the fourth abomination where the probation closes.
Er ist gleich zum 4. Gräuel gegangen, wo die Gnadentür sich schließt.
Wasn't a case like some people, they get deceived and they're now in some abomination, but they've not yet bowed down and worshipped the sun, so they still have a chance to repent,
Also
right?
das ist nicht dasselbe, also weil... Sorry.
Just put it in your own words.
Ja.
It says it's not like some, right? Not like some, like God's people who get deceived here, but they don't give in to the Sunday law, but they have some, maybe some other points that they've turned away from God from.
Also das ist nicht wie...
You know what I mean?
Not quite.
Right. Look, God's people are set up at the beginning here, and then the parable shows that many fall away, right?
Also Gottes Volk, sie werden hier am Anfang aufgestellt und das Gleichnis zeigt, dass hier viele wegfallen.
Okay, Do the ones that fall away have a chance to return?
Und diejenigen, die wegfallen, haben sie eine Chance umzukehren?
However,
Ja.
if they accepted the Sunday law, would they have a chance to return?
Aber wenn sie hier das Sonntagsgesetz angenommen hätten, hätten sie eine Chance umzukehren?
No way, right?
Nein.
That's why you have a set of false prophets there. Their probation closes,
Deswegen
right?
hat man hier falsche Propheten und ihre Gnadentür schließt sich.
Do you have a set of false prophets here?
Hat man hier also falsche Propheten?
Yes, their probation closes,
Ja,
right?
ihre Gnadentür schließt sich.
And it brings you down to the last group there. Their probation
Das
closes.
bringt uns hier zu der letzten Gruppe, ihre Gnadentür schließt sich.
Okay, it's progressive, but
Es ist
it's
progressiv.
progressive until the point where you keep that Sunday knowingly. It says you receive the mark of the beast. Your probation closes.
Es ist
Right.
progressiv, aber wenn du das Sonntagsgesetz wissentlich befolgst, dann sagt es, dass deine Gnadentür sich schließt.
Right?
Richtig.
Okay, so you got to look at these things closely, right? You got to bring them all together and not look at them individually, or you'll never make the connections.
Also man
Right.
muss sich diese Dinge ganz genau anschauen und alles zusammenbringen, sonst kann man nicht diese Verbindungen sehen.
So it shows you right here that the same king, prophecy showing the same king that goes through here in ignorance, gets lifted up, and he's still in power right here, but his counselors deceive him.
Also
Right.
die Prophetie zeigt, dass der König, der hier am Anfang das Sonntagsgesetz macht, der wird dann hier gedemütigt und es zeigt, dass er hier aber immer noch in der Macht ist, aber er wird verführt durch seine Ratgeber.
Okay, and when you go back to verse 7, chapter 6, verse 7.
Und gehen wir zurück zu Kapitel 6 und Vers 6.
It says, all the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the councillors, the captains have consulted together. How many?
Wie viele?
All.
Alle.
So that would include anybody that's underneath him, right?
Also das würde jeden mit einschließen, der unter ihm ist.
So Belshazzar was under another ruler, right?
Also Belsazar war unter einem weiteren Herrscher.
And Belshazzar is the one that immediately sets a Sunday law up there, right?
Belsazar ist derjenige, der hier sofort ein Sonntagsgesetz macht.
Okay, so what happens to these men right here in verse, these counselors here, what happens to them?
Und was geschieht mit diesen Ratgebern?
Okay, let's go on in chapter 6.
Gehen wir weiter in Kapitel 6.
Go to verse 24.
Geht zu Vers 24 und im Deutschen Vers 13.
This is Daniel, God's people, when God shuts the lion's mouth and saves him, right?
Also Daniel ist jetzt Gottes Volk und wenn er diese Löwenmäule schließt und sie dann rettet.
It says, and the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. And the lions had the mastery of them. So who got cast into the den of lions?
Wer wurde in die Löwengrube geworfen?
No, those that accused Daniel. Those of those counselors that came before the king and accused him.
Diejenigen von den Ratgebern, die vor Darius gekommen sind und Daniel angeklagt hatten.
That would be the second lot of prophets, right? Is that
No. You're mixing the internal and the external, Jennifer. The false prophets are internal. That's God's people.
No, but we always have external and internal, it's the same. And God's people get accused at the
No. Look, go back to Daniel. Go back to Daniel 6 and verse.
Also die Frage war,
Verse 6.
wo auf der Linie sie angeklagt werden. Und gehen wir nochmal zurück zu Daniel 6 und Vers 5 im Deutschen.
Okay, in fact, let's read verse 4.
Lesen wir ab Vers 3. Im Deutschen Vers 3.
Wanneer is op 5, dan is het 4.
How can it be the same?
It's one verse.
But he said no 4.
It's 4, so it has to be before.
Entschuldigung.
Yes, right.
Also Vers 3 im Deutschen.
Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault in him. Then said these men, shall we not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him according to the law of his God? Then these presidents and princes assembled together. So there's a group that plot, and then they bring everybody together, right?
Das ist eine Gruppe, die sich zusammenschließt und dann bringen sie alle zusammen.
Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said, thus unto him, King Darius live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the councillors and the captains, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree, that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. So when he makes this decree, it's right there.
Wenn dieses Dekret macht, ist es ja hier.
There's where the accusers are,
Da
right?
sind ja die Ankläger.
Okay, so those accusers, when you go to verse 24,
Und diese Ankläger, wenn wir jetzt im Deutschen zu Vers 23 gehen,
and the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. Right? Those people right at the beginning, because you just go down to verse 12, I think it is.
also das sind eben die Leute, die von Anfang sind. Und
Yeah, let's start in verse 11.
fangen wir im Deutschen Vers 10 an.
Then these men, the same men, right,
Diese
found
Männer,
Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. Then they came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Then answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. So what are they doing?
was machen sie?
Same people, it's accusing him, right?
Dieselben Leute, die ihn anklagen.
Okay, but when you get to verse 16,
Aber wenn ihr jetzt zu Vers 15 geht,
what does Darius do?
was macht Darius?
Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel, and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. What does Darius do?
Was macht Darius?
Prophesies according to the pattern that he's understood beforehand, and he has received as a Jew.
And doesn't stand up for.
He's exercising faith, right? That God is able to deliver him, because he's learned of God in this time period here, right?
Übt jetzt Glauben aus, dass ihn befreien kann, weil hat jetzt von Gott in dieser Zeitspanne
How
gelernt.
does he know God is able to deliver him?
Woher weiß dass Gott in der Lage ist, ihn zu befreien?
Because he was right there when he delivered those 3 Hebrews out of the fire,
Weil
prophetically. Right?
prophetisch gesehen war dabei, wo Gott diese 3 Hebräer aus dem Feuer hier gerettet hat.
Not historically, prophetically, because they're the same king prophetically,
Nicht
right?
historisch, sondern prophetisch, weil prophetisch sind sie dieselben Könige.
So he's seen what God is able to do, right?
Also hat gesehen, was Gott in der Lage ist zu
The
tun.
fiery furnace is the lion's den. They're both the same illustration, right?
Der Feuerofen ist diese Löwengrube, das ist beides dieselbe Darstellung.
So he's tricked into making this decree, so he thinks, okay, I'll make the decree, but I know that God is going to deliver Daniel, right?
Also wird getäuscht, dass dieses Dekret macht und er macht es dann, aber er sagt, aber ich weiß, dass Gott in der Lage ist, sie zu befreien.
Okay, verse 18.
Und jetzt Vers 17.
Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting, neither were there instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. What's he doing?
Was macht
Praying day and night that Daniel gets delivered, right?
betet Tag und Nacht, damit Daniel befreit wird.
And confessing his own sin, right?
Und er bekennt seine eigene Sünde.
So it says, then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste unto the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God whom thou servest continually able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. Right? So, you see his faith, the king is now established back in this place. Right?
Also man kann jetzt sehen, durch seinen Glauben ist der König jetzt wieder etabliert in seinem Ort.
Right? And if you compare this now with Daniel chapter 5,
Wenn man das jetzt mit Daniel 5 vergleicht,
so Belshazzar, he's absolutely terrified now of what's happened, right?
Belshazzar ist jetzt ein Schrecken über das, was geschieht.
Okay, so verse 16.
Vers 16.
It says, And I have heard of thee that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now if thou canst read the writing and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. What's the difference between Belshazzar here and Darius?
Was ist der Unterschied zwischen Belshazzar und Darius?
Darius knows God, right?
Darius kennt Gott.
Belshazzar doesn't know God,
Belshazzar kennt Gott nicht.
right? He doesn't know anything about him, but he had every opportunity to learn of him in this time period, right?
Weiß gar nichts von ihm, aber er hatte jede Möglichkeit von ihm zu lernen in dieser Zeitspanne.
And had he learned to know him, he would have known what many, many tekelu fasen means,
Und
right?
hätte er von ihm gelernt, dann hätte er gewusst, was Mene, Mene, Tekel und Farsin bedeutet.
Okay? And therefore, go to verse 18.
Dann gehen wir jetzt zu Vers 18.
O thou king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom and majesty and glory and honour. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he slew, and whom he would, he kept alive. Who set Nebuchadnezzar up?
Wer hat Nebukadnezar aufgerichtet?
God set him up, right?
Gott hat ihn aufgerichtet.
Right. But when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with the grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men. Because the dew of heaven is the manna, right? Which is the oil.
Himmels ist das Manna, was das Öl ist.
So he becomes, when he gets humbled here, he becomes this virgin that is now gathering this oil in this time period,
Und
right?
wenn er gedemütigt wird, dann wird er jetzt diese Jungfrau, die das Öl in dieser Zeitspanne sammelt.
Okay, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. And thou his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this, but hast liftest up thyself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives, and thy concubines have drunk wine in them, and thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold and brass and iron and wood and stone. So, Belshazzar right here is the east wind,
Belshazzar, hier ist der Ostwind.
right?
Richtig.
So who's going to punish now Belshazzar?
Wer wird also Belshazzar jetzt bestrafen?
The east wind,
Der Ostwind,
right? Islam,
der
right?
Islam.
And that's what we read in Revelation 9,
Und
right?
das können wir auch in Offenbarung 9 lesen.
You see, when you parallel in all these things, he's the one that gets thrown into the den of lions, right?
Und das jeder sehen, also wenn man die Dinge zusammenbringt, ist er derjenige, der in die Löwengrube geworfen wird.
Right? Is Islam likened to a lion?
Wird der Islam mit dem Löwen verglichen?
Yes, just go to
Yeah.
Revelation 9.
Geht zur Offenbarung 9.
Verse 8.
Offenbarung 9, Vers 8.
It says, And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth was as the teeth of lions, right? So go back to Daniel 6.
Also geht's nochmal zurück zu Daniel 6.
Yeah, go to verse 24.
Dann geht's zu Vers 23 im Deutschen.
It says, And the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. And the lions had their mastery over them, and brake all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. Right? So, if you just bring line upon line together, this is the destruction of Babylon, right?
Also wenn man Linie auf Linie zusammenbringt, dann ist das die Zerstörung von Babylon.
Who is it that destroys Babylon in Isaiah 13?
Wer zerstört Babylon in Jesaja 13?
Sorry? The Medes and the Persians,
Die
right?
Meder und die Perser.
Okay, they destroy Babylon, but they're likened unto the destruction of Sodom, right? This fire that comes down from heaven.
Die
Right?
zerstören Babylon, aber sie werden verglichen mit der Zerstörung von Sodom, dieses Feuer, was vom Himmel
Okay,
kommt.
and they spare, just go to Isaiah 13, just get this point.
Und geht nochmal zu Jesaja 13, um diesen Punkt zu verstehen.
You'll see this point, we'll come back to Daniel 6 in a minute.
Ihr werdet den Punkt sehen, wir gehen gleich nochmal zurück zu Daniel 6.
Just go to verse 16.
Geht zu Vers 16.
It says, Their children also shall be dashed to pieces before their eyes, their houses shall be spoiled, and their wives ravished. Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. Their bows also shall dash the young men to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb, their eyes shall not spare children. What do we see there?
Was können wir dort sehen?
It's the same thing that happens in the destruction of Babylon, right?
It's the same.
Destruction of Jerusalem, sorry.
Das ist dasselbe, was in der Zerstörung von Jerusalem geschieht.
And it says to Babylon, what you do unto them, they're going to do now to you.
Es
Right?
sagt zu Babylon, was du ihnen angetan hast, werden sie jetzt dir antun.
Okay, so when you go back to Daniel 6,
Wenn wir jetzt zurück zu Daniel 6 gehen,
verse 24, you see the very same principle.
in dem deutschen Vers 23 können wir dasselbe Prinzip
The
sehen.
king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. Right?
Also sie, ihre Kinder und ihre Frauen.
It's the punishment that comes, right?
Das ist die Bestrafung, die kommt.
Everybody see.
Kann das jeder sehen?
Okay? So, all these little details really make a difference,
Also all
right?
diese kleinen Details, die machen wirklich einen Unterschied.
That's why the lions didn't attack Daniel, because they don't attack those that have the seal of God.
Yes, for sure, right?
Und deswegen haben die Löwen nicht Daniel angegriffen, weil sie greifen nicht diejenigen an, die das Siegel Gottes haben.
Okay, but they're different lions.
That's what I wonder.
Prophetically, they're different, right? The lions in this time that's going to devour.
No, I mean here in this story when Daniel was cast into the den of lions, because that's at the end, right?
Yes, but it's not Islam.
Also hier sind die Löwen nicht der Islam.
Okay, he's standing before the earthly powers at this point. Right? They're the lions, but it just changes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to
It's
understand.
the East Wing. It's just two different entities.
Yeah, it's just exactly the same principles, right? But it just changes. It's still Satan. Remember, it's Satan that does this work here, and then it's Satan. Once he's deceived them, he punishes them at the end. But he just uses a different entity to do it.
Also es sind eben verschiedene Löwen. Also es ist ja Satan, der hier das eine Werk tut, aber dann ist Satan, der das andere Werk tut und diejenigen bestraft, die er verführt hat. Also einmal sind die Löwen.
So it's still the east wind. It's still lions, but it's a different earthly element that's punishing this group that would have punished Daniel.
Also es ist immer noch der Ostwind und
Löwen.
die Löwen, aber es ist eine andere Macht, die Daniel bestraft und eine andere Macht, die oder gegen Daniel kommt und eine andere Macht, die sie dann bestraft.
Ultimately, those lions are Satan.
Also
right? Satan and his angels, right?
letztendlich sind diese Löwen Satan und seine Engel.
So it's the same group of lions all the way through. It's Satan and his angels. They just use a different element to mark the east wind here as they do to use the east wind to punish Babylon at the end.
Also eigentlich ist es die ganze Zeit dieselben Löwen, also Satan und seine Engel, aber sie benutzen verschiedene Mächte. Hier, also hier benutzen sie andere Macht als hier am Ende.
Right?
Richtig.
There is much more on this topic that we can look at,
Und da
right?
gibt es noch viel mehr über dieses Thema, was wir uns anschauen können.
But we're out of time.
Aber
Right?
wir sind jetzt über der Zeit.
So, I want to go back and to look at these things more. There's many more points that we want to bring together.
Und ich möchte zurückgehen und noch viele weitere Punkte zusammenbringen.
But I hope at least we can see the consistency of all the books, right? When you really look at them closely and bring them line upon line, right? It starts to form a picture in our mind that we wouldn't get if we didn't do that, right?
Also ich hoffe, dass wir eben diese Beständigkeit von diesen Kapiteln sehen können und wenn wir all diese Dinge zusammenbringen, dann formt es eben ein Bild in unserem Kopf, das wir nicht erhalten würden, wenn wir das nicht tun würden.
Right?
Richtig.
Okay. Anyway, let's close with prayer and then
Lasst uns mit Gebet abschließen.
look at this more tomorrow.
Morgen werden wir mehr darüber anschauen.
Vater im Himmel, wir danken dir, dass du uns dein Wort immer klarer offenbaren willst und hilf uns doch, die Dinge zu begreifen und dass du uns offenbarst, wie sie zusammengehören.
Father in heaven, I thank you that you explain to us these things and how they are brought together.
Hilf uns, dass wir es verstehen, wie es auf Linie zusammengebracht werden kann.
And help us that we would understand how it can be brought line upon line together.
Und wir danken dir dafür, Herr,
And we thank you for this, Lord,
dass du uns die Dinge offenbarst, wenn wir dich danach fragen und nach den Gleichnissen und Geheimnissen bitten, dass du es uns offenbarst, wenn wir sie nicht verstehen.
and that you reveal to us all these things about the parables and secrets when we ask you for these things that we understand not.
Danke, Herr, dass wir dieses Vorrecht haben, die Dinge zu verstehen, wenn wir darum bitten.
And thank you that we have the privilege to understand these things when we ask for them.
Und hilf, dass diese Dinge in unserem Gedächtnis und unser Verstand bleiben.
And help that these things would remain in our memory, in our mind.
Dafür danken wir dir, Herr, in Jesu Namen.
We thank you for this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Mm.